Should online church be stopped? Should we not have online church? Should the churches stop live streaming? Wretched, well, I guess now they are Gospel Partners Media, formerly or in partnership with Wretched Radio, which I enjoy listening to. Todd Friel is a fantastic gentleman. I think he's theologically sound on many more things than other people you have the opportunity to listen to on YouTube, but we may disagree on here. In fact, they recently put up a comment that will clarify some of, I think, misunderstandings. But I want to go through this because he makes some points that I hear often. Him and his partner, I don't remember his name. I apologize for that. And I think we have to create some corrections because I used to be against online church. I used to be against live streaming church, and especially online church and live streaming church. I think became easier, more effective once we created the vocabulary, once we created the both and framework. Go check out Jason Moore in his book. I think I loaned mine out, so I don't have it anymore. Both and I'll put a link down in the comments. In the description. Go check those out because I think there is a good, God-honoring, gospel-focused way to do online church. Obviously, the way we do church at Crosswaves is more of a home church with an online teaching aspect. So some people might call that online. But should online church be stopped? That's what this video is kind of saying. So I want to go through this video and really just address some of the things that they're saying.
We love you, online church!
To everyone online who's joining us.
Greetings to all of our. Perhaps you have a favorite preacher. You've seasons. Zoom church is a big stinker of an evangelical idea. Number one.
I don't know anyone that calls it Zoom church. You can have Zoom Bible study, right?
One. Perhaps you have a favorite preacher. You've seen him on YouTube, their church website. You kind of know the guy, but imagine now having dinner with that fellow. Would that be different? You go, yeah, it'd be a lot.
This is a very common argument. I make the same one because even if you are a part of an online church, you should be among other believers. It's kind of like, if I pay thousands of dollars to go to college, or let's say $1,000 for my daughter to go to college, I want her to go to class. When you're in class, you can have opportunities to meet with other students, to form relationships, to ask the teacher questions. If you're just watching on a screen, it's very passive, and church is not supposed to be passive. So I agree with this on this point.
Different. I'd actually learn about the guy, and the guy would learn about me. Imagine how much more is gained face-to-face than through electronic media.
And this is, by the way, this problem that he's addressing here is not an online issue. It's a consumer church issue. There are a lot of people that have never shaken their pastor's hands because they only go to church, sit on the back row, and then they leave without loitering around, in which case churches should be loitering after service. So this is not inherently an online problem. So to say this is bad because this always happens online, it happens in person too.
Demonstration number 2, sales. Get in front of the client. You can't just send them emails, man. You got to build that rapport. Even sales managers recognize there is something about actually being with another carbon-14 unit.
He's got such a way with words. I agree with this. Some people I'm sure would have an issue. A lot of people don't like bringing business terminology and psychology into the church. And as a marketing guy, obviously, I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem if you do it the wrong way. But yeah, I mean, there is a psychological thing about being in the room with someone versus being on the phone or being over line. I mean, when I go out and meet someone, I'm going to close that client, and we're gonna do their website. When I meet them once and talk to them on the phone or through the computer, 50-50. And if I never see them face to face, I mean, 25%, right? So I mean, there is something there about trust. And yes, if you're in church and your pastor is your shepherd, your leader, yeah, being in the room is kind of a big deal. I agree.
Demonstration.
I agree with a lot of this.
Number 3, the movies. You see celebrities on TV or through your Netflix, but what if you go see that celebrity in a play? Is that different?
I don't think that hits. I don't know. We have so many people that don't care about the movies anymore. YouTube is overtaking Netflix in certain demographics. People don't need in-person entertainment like that. And only that, I mean, the church it's not a play. It's not a movie.
You don't get to know them as well as you would if you actually broke bread together. It would just be a different experience. That is why we cannot neglect the assembling of the saints, because
So this is where I think we might differ, in that assembling of the saints in a church body locally, I believe, doesn't have to look like a typical church, right? We have churches that meet in movie theaters. We have churches that meet at Starbucks or at the local coffee shop. You don't have to have a lot of people together in a building under one leadership to have church. And this is where one of the things where online church can be an asset to someone that maybe wants to have an Acts fellowship with someone else, but they don't want to teach. And that's actually what we do at our church. We have the teaching done by educated, trained, theologically sound pastors and speakers. So we can meet and just focus on fellowshipping, praying, breaking of bread, and just discipling and encouraging and edifying one another in person. I think that's great. And so to say that you have to stop everything and go to a location, that's the only place church can be, or at least a church gathering can be a little bit misleading.
Assembling on the internet, it is not assembling at all. And those three illustrations should make that clear. But if they were not successful,
I think this was clear for an older generation, but for the younger folks, face to face isn't that important anymore. I mean, it's nice to be face to face, right? My daughter would much rather have friends come over for a sleepover versus just playing on Roblox all night virtually, right? There's certain things about being in person. But to say that it's this or that and there's no in between or no hybrid of them, I think is again something that applies to the older generation, not so much the younger generation.
And encouraging you not to abandon showing your church services online. I say that is a blessing to those who are shut in, can't get there, they're traveling. Keep doing that, but don't ever suggest that that is a substitute for this.
And this is something that the online church needs to get better, or those that are in favor of online churches need to get better about communicating. I was at a seminar by a friend, Jeff Reed, and it was all about online churches. And I am here with an open mind at the seminar, but I'm like, you can't neglect the gathering of believers. Like, you can't not meet each other. You can't do church alone in the couch on your pajamas. You just can't. That's not church. That's Bible study. It's not a gathering of, like, you got to have more people there. And I'm not talking about Matthew 18. I'm talking about a gathering of believers. And when the first thing Jeff said, and then the next speaker, the first thing they said was, this is not to replace your local congregation. This is an entry point. This is like going out into the mission field and meeting someone and evangelizing at Starbucks. You don't keep meeting at Starbucks. You bring them to the home church. That's what online church is. So I think people hear the word online church and they think it's not in person, it's all online. What it really is like a digital mission field to bring people into in-person connection. Now, it doesn't have to be done by it doesn't have to be done by a standard traditional church. It could be just a person trying to find people, to build a relationship with people, do Zoom with people, with the goal of eventually becoming an in-person fellowship. Because I think there are things, even though there are arguments about, well, how do you do digital baptism and how do you break bread and all that stuff, I think that stuff is still better done. Those observances are still better done in person. But to say it's that or this and there's no in between, I think is a mischaracterization of what online church is.
As Dr. Nathan Busenitz attempts to make very plain in Wretched Worldview to who?
Live streaming church. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
And this is different. See, this is, we need to make a differentiation between online church and live streaming your church. Okay. There's a difference. Live streaming your church is like live streaming the teacher's lecture at college, right? This is where the main thing is. If you can't make it, this is an acceptable alternative. This is so you don't have to fall behind. This is so you can still get the context here, the content, still be encouraged. Online church is, we're going to meet together online, all remote, and we're just going to sing, have Bible study, and there is no in-person. So I think there's a differentiation there that we need to get clear on.
Well, let's think about it from a biblical perspective, but first, some pre-understandings. One would be that technology has made church more convenient.
I mean, yeah, but it's not just online stuff. I mean, we have air conditioning, we have technology in the seats that we use, more comfortable seats, technology in the floor, so we don't have to upkeep the floor. Even parking lots, we have places to park our big hunks of moving technological homes. So yeah, technology is not an excuse to not do for there is no excuse for the church not to use technology because we've already come so far.
A second pre-understanding.
I mean, I always joke, we don't meet in God's own creation. We sit in artificial environments under artificial light with artificially enhanced audio. So, I mean, technology is surrounding us in the church building without the live stream.
Now I can do church from the comfort.
And again, this is not a pre-understanding. This is a misunderstanding. If you're doing church, you are among other believers, edifying, exhorting God, praising, praying, laying on hands, observing communion, baptism, dedication. Those are public things. You can't do that. It's like I'm having a party on my couch. It's just me. No, you're not having a party. You're having a pity party, but it's not church. That's a misunderstanding.
And safety of my living room. All we do at church is watch a sermon on a screen.
And this is not a misunderstanding of online church. This is a misunderstanding of church. This is where so many churches get in trouble because they hire a pastor who thinks they're just going to preach. Why do we got to pay this guy $60,000 a year to preach? No, the pastor does much more than that. Church is much more than a sermon.
How is this any different?
By the way, this has nothing to do with live streaming. This is the same thing as watching it on demand or a podcast.
Different. Final pre-understanding. My family has sports events and other things.
And this is, I guess it's a pre-understanding, but it's just bad. It's just bad. This is the same thing as, well, if you're going to have sex, take this condom. Like, no, that's bad parenting. All right. That's bad Christian parenting for sure. So no, this is not a pre-understanding. This is just bad.
Things to do on Sunday.
If someone said this, I would say that's not okay.
And these
You notice how these pre-understandings are already misaligned with just general church.
Technologies allow us to still watch church even when we can't be there. Those would be some pre-understandings. Let's set those things aside and let's ask ourselves, is this a good trend? Well, some explicit verses, Matthew 16, verse 18, the Lord.
So again, if you have a pre-understanding, to use their words, that online church is a substitute for in-person church, then yeah, this would be an issue. But as an alternative, as a temporary mission field,
Jesus says to Peter and the other apostles after Peter's grace, because the very from Christ, but also the.
And yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's assembly. It's not possible to have a non-assembling assembly. I mean, that's tough after 2020 because we did a lot without assembling, and we found out just how much we can do to a fault. I would add. Words
are coming out to gather together. Then I think probably the most.
I think that's one of it is that we have to go out to gather together, and so many people expect the church to come to them and do them. In which case, the fault is on the church, not the person. And yeah, this is what I just said. I'm going to skip some of this because this is just, we know this stuff. It's not commentary. It's just Bible. And yeah, I mean, he's reading the Bible verses. This is it. Now, can you love one another and do good deeds, not forsake assembling? Can you encourage one another online? Unfortunately, you can. I wish that wasn't the case. My daughter was having a bad day and I couldn't cheer her up. My daughter couldn't cheer her up. She said, "What do you do when you're sad?" I was like, "I talk to my mom." You call your grandma. She called grandma, walked out of the office 5 minutes later, happy as a clown. Happy as a clown? Happy as a clam. Happy as a clam? Clams are happy? I don't know. I only ever see dead ones. So, I mean, you can do all of this online. You actually can.
Section is not forsaking our own assembly.
It just depends on your version of assembly. The one another's is where I draw the line.
These and most of these commands require in-person interaction.
And I like the way they put this because again, this is a an indictment, I guess is the word, to online church. But again, this is where we have to answer the question: if someone is not okay to come to church, they have, whether you like it or not, panic attacks to come to church because of past church hurt, because they don't like to be around people. Maybe because they just can't get out of the house. How acceptable is it for them to be a part of your fellowship online until one can be established where they can meet?
In order with others that the New Testament calls you to as a Christian.
So yeah, he's just reading the Lord's table. Yeah, we talked about that. That's tough to do online. That should be done with others. Church discipline restoration. Again, this is an online issue, but it's also a church issue. And to cast shade on online church, you also need to fairly cast shade at regular churches who do not practice Matthew 18 discipline.
Restoration process, but this similar.
Because I can guarantee you, if they are doing Matthew 18, they ain't doing it with the whole church. That discipline's only happening to the 7 people that show up on Sunday night.
Us do church online are in danger. You can't do the one another's with one another, the mingling, the sanctifying, the correcting, the rebuking.
And this is just again, it's not an online problem. It's a church problem. And so I think if you actually address this in the church, then you wouldn't even see as many online churches, because this correcting, edifying, sanctification stuff would be happening in person, and less people would be falling away into online church.
All of the commands that we are given as New Testament saints cannot be fulfilled if you're sitting in your kitchen going to church and I'm sitting.
And I would agree with that. However, I know some younger people that can be just as edified, if not more encouraged, edified, and would be more likely to be open and vulnerable online. And I think this is something that we have to address. I think, again, online is a good starting point with the intention of eventually becoming an in-person fellowship, even if it stays small, even if it's a small church of 5 to 6 believers that meet in a home, then they can do the one another's. They don't have to go to a traditional local church.
Versus this actual human interaction.
Well, there's deficiencies not.
And you can have we're having human interaction right now. Right now, some people have their headphones in their ears, and I am closer to them, and they are paying more attention to me than they ever pay attention to anyone in church. That's sad, by the way, which thank you, I guess. But I mean, that's what it is. The internet has opened up a new wave of relationships that have never been seen before. Did God see it coming? Absolutely. Has he equipped his church to disciple through those mediums? Absolutely. But is it the end? No, it's the beginning.
Not only with the observance of the ordinances, but with a number of the means of grace that we would see that the local church provides to the believer who comes and assembles.
And again, I think some of this falls on the church for not doing church right. The church has become consumerized. It's all about the music we play, the environment we create, and the sermons we preach. Where does the believer fit into all that? All the staff meetings are just about what happens on stage. So don't be upset if the believer then thinks that church happens on the stage. And if I can watch the stage at home, then why do I need to go? This is just as much on the church leaders as much as it is on the staff. It has been decades of the church leaders putting their own congregation and believers on the sidelines, not even on the sidelines, on the benches. So who cares what bench I sit on?
Right? You can't.
Did I say benches? I meant bleachers.
Can't do biblical fellowship through a screen.
They put their own church on the bleachers. So who cares what stadium I go to?
You can't, but people argue that you can't. And I would say, look at the fruit of those kinds of systems.
And again, there are some people that the fruit is there. There are some people that came to know Christ virtually, digitally. And I've shook his hand, and he is a believer through and through. Maybe even more learned now than I am. And he's only been a believer for a few years.
The individualism of that, I think the pandemic in many ways showed people just how superficial, shallow, and inadequate this kind of screen experience is.
I'm going to end it with this because I got to go to another meeting. The pandemic also did the opposite. The pandemic showed just how shallow. What were the words he described?
Just how superficial, shallow, and inadequate.
The pandemic showed just how superficial, shallow, and inadequate in-person church is, because nobody's lives changed spiritually during the pandemic, because all they were doing was going to church, watching a sermon, and going home. Then the pandemic hit. So they stayed at home, watched a sermon, and stayed at home. Their lives were exactly the same spiritually, because the church was not churching. It was not an ecclesia. It wasn't a gathering of believers for the edification and exhortation of God and praising God and equipping of the saints to go out and make disciples. It was a place to go watch a stage. So yeah, if I'm going to go watch a stage, and now I can't, but wait a second, it's the same thing at home. Church should not be the same thing at home. This is why when we do marketing services for churches, we specifically say, this is not about the church. This is not about the stage. This is about Jesus and what Jesus can do for this person through the church. So the pandemic not only showed people how shallow and superficial the screen is, it showed them how shallow and superficial the church in person can be. So this is not an indictment of just the people that want to do online church. This is an indictment on the church leaders who have allowed church to become consumeristic in their approach.
Because they were not engaging in that regular fellowship.
Personally, I think a big part of the problem and why this is gaining in popularity is a low view of the church, the one another's, what we do there together.
We might be saying the same thing in different ways.
What we rep, getting along with you, but I'm getting along with everybody.
Much a consumer mindset. Well, I can still be entertained by watching a screen. And if what the content on that screen, if it feels like it is, directed to me as the consumer.
And that's the same thing. If it's a stage in person, it's a stage on screen. Let's see what he says, and then we got to wrap it up.
Completely changes how we even think about the church. You can't do that adequately through a screen. Zoom church is no substitute for the real thing. It's just not.
And I would agree with that. However, it can be an alternative. And I'll wrap it up with this. They actually commented this. We did mention that online church can be a wonderful blessing to those who cannot physically assemble. It is a benefit for those who don't have a good church around them. That's exactly what Crosswaves is for us. And so, again, we need to be careful with confusing online church with online worship, with remote worship, to like, what is church? All this to say, online church is not necessarily an evil that needs to be stopped, but rather church needs to be revisited, because whether you're observing from a screen or in person, if you're just observing and consuming, the question is that church? Because if it's not church through a screen, it's not church in person. And this is what the overall message needs to be for the church. It's not about the church itself, the stage, the performance, the speaker, the preacher, the worship set. It's about what Jesus can do for you, and the church is your local avenue to find that faith and grow and be sanctified and edified and live better through Jesus Christ. And the church is just the vehicle. But if we make the sermon the vehicle, the worship the vehicle, the events, the whatever, that becomes the vehicle. Well, guess what? That vehicle drives on screen or in person. So when you promote your church and you do online church, make sure you make it about Jesus, not just the thing. If you're not already liking and subscribing by this, and this resonated with you, like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see y'all in the next video.